Okay, so we're going to move on to messaging and talk about how we actually build out effective messages in order to win over our audience, in order to get the word out about the great work we do, and then put those people into action in order to win campaigns, elections, legislation for our libraries. We can skip the first slides. All the information that I'm going to talk about today comes from a bunch of the different trainings that we do on the far left and the far right and everything in between of politics. So I'm taking some tactics out from the far right, I'm taking some tactics out from the far left, and I'm bringing them to you so we can put them into action here for libraries, okay? Nothing that I'm presenting here today are things that I've made up. It's all stuff that's come out of these kinds of campaign trainings. They've come out of candidate trainings. They've come out of a lot of the books and the campaign consultant training guides and all that kind of stuff as well, all right? So why politics? I think we've already addressed this, of course. We are framing this as politics because this is where the power comes from. This is where our funding comes from. This is where the legislation lies that we need in order to fund our libraries. We've already kind of looked at the nationwide data. And one thing that I want to point out on this issue is we don't have any statewide data in California about libraries. And I just talked to Natalie with CLA, and because they're working on putting together some data set for libraries, public libraries across the state. I don't know who wants to champion this, but this isn't really my realm. But maybe somebody should reach out to Natalie and talk to her about throwing some like law library questions in there. And find out how many people actually know about law libraries, get some data back about how they feel about law libraries. That's something for you guys to think about. Natalie.
She's at the state library.
Yeah, Natalie, yeah, I forgot her last name. Cole, Natalie Cole. Yes, thank you.
Natalie Cole?
Yeah.
Like Nat King Cole?
That's right. All right, but we have no idea who in California supports libraries and why. We don't know what issues they care about. We don't know what crossover issues they care about. We don't have any model voters, right? And a model voter is a way to look at an individual and see if they are likely to vote for an issue or not. And there's a lot of different model voter sets that you can build out that help identify what you would talk to them about. So, for example, if you know somebody is in your model voter set that they care about education issues, so you can tie libraries to education issues in order to rally them for your cause. I'm going to talk about that a little bit later too. But not knowing this kind of stuff, I think, is fairly dangerous to us, right? The AFP has this data. The NRA has this data. All the anti-tax, the Tea Party, the Republican National Committee, the Democrats, everybody has this data who's doing serious political work.
When you're advocating for public libraries, I understand the ALA probably has the data, but what?
No, they don't.
They don't? Okay. Where do you go to get library data?
So that awareness to funding study is our baseline. And then we encourage every campaign that we work with to about a year before they run and put something on the ballot to run a local public opinion poll. And there's a lot of local public opinion pollsters that you can use. If you're interested, I can recommend some really, really great ones here in California that can run statewide polling or local polling or whatever you need.
So this isn't something libraries do in-house?
No, and it shouldn't be something that you do in-house because we are all incredibly biased. And it's really hard to create an unbiased poll with being as biased as we are. Like public opinion polling, unless you have training in it, background in it, is a pretty exacting science. And if you get the data wrong, Hillary, we know what happens, right? Hillary's data, by the way, wasn't wrong. It was just wrong in the wrong. It was just right in the wrong ways. Okay, like she still won the majority vote, but in the wrong places. Yeah.
How can you tell bad polling data from good polling data?
That's a big problem. That's what we learned. I mean, it's really, really hard to tell a bad poll from a good poll. We've seen so many that we can kind of say like this looks off or this looks weird or this isn't something that we normally see because we do we go through dozens of those data sets every year. But I'm not even none of us at every library are like we'll run the poll for you. And we'll consult, we'll look at it, but I don't have a great way to tell that. Yeah. Yeah, and here's an example of a bad poll. If anybody have you guys seen the GOP polls that come out, right? And I'm picking on the right. I don't know if law librarians swing right. I don't know. Maybe I'm making a lot of enemies today. I don't know. But
We don't see the data.
the GOP polls come out that say like, do you think that the unfair media is unfair to Trump? Yes or no? You know what I mean? Do you see that kind of stuff? They have a different agenda. Their agenda isn't to get data, but something else. But yeah, so there's a lot of ways you can get that data. I highly recommend hiring a real public opinion polling firm to do it right, because the more correct your data is, the better everything else that you do will be. We're going to build data sets. We're going to build messages on data sets about audiences that we know. Okay. Like I said, we didn't know to put out the message about seniors, the library's programs for seniors to that campaign in Washington. The only reason we knew that is because we had the polling to tell us that, right?
I mean, some of our libraries right now are on life support, essentially. So how can we find organizations that will help us provide this polling data on a very shoestring budget?
Well, a couple of things there. I'm gonna push us away from thinking about what we do on a shoestring budget. We have to think about how to do it right, okay? And there are ways to do it right. This is all C3 fundable work. You don't need to be a political organization to do this kind of stuff. There are grants available. There are private funders that you could tap into. We're not going to do a thing today on fundraising, but we can talk about how to do fundraising another time. There are a lot of ways to raise the money to do the polling. A statewide poll, according to the pollsters that we've worked with, are between $30,000 and $60,000. So that's not terrible, but it can all be done with C3 money, and it can all be done donor money and that kind of stuff.
I was just say, I think you gave us the answer though, because you said CLA is already working on this.
Yeah. So
There's a potential for coalition there, right?
yeah.
Earlier terminology to get some data.
I'm really throwing Natalie under the bus on that one, though, just so you guys know. I don't want to put her on that spot, but yes, they're talking about doing statewide polling.
There's the possibility that we could piggyback on the larger
Patrick said earlier, coalition, to me, that was really important, that CCCLL is not be an island, right? We have these other organizations, NoCal, CLA, there's potential there.
Yeah, no, there definitely is. Fundraising. So one of the other things that we recommend that organizations do, you guys never go to the voter. Do you guys ever go to the voters? You're never voter funded, right?
No.
Okay, all right. But think about working with us. We can be the platform that can raise some of that money for you. We can help collect donations and expend the funds to do that through our C4 vehicle. That's exactly what we're built out to do, is to lend you the tools in order to fundraise, in order to expend those funds, and add it to our national data sets that we're building that's also available to you guys, right? Whenever we do something, just a little bit more background on every library, whenever we do something with an association, all the data that we build, everything that we do, they get. We give them all the data back. We give them all the emails that we get back. We give them all the people that we've identified back. We're just here basically to give you guys things. That's our entire agenda, is to give you the tools and resources that you need to complete your work. So if that's something that people are interested in talking about, we can talk about figuring out some kind of fundraising model in order to do that work. Okay. We also have a C3 branch of our organization that's specifically for grants and this kind of data and polling stuff that we can also talk about if you don't want to create one, whatever. Okay. All right. That answer your question? Great. So this data is just incredibly important. We talked a lot about surfacing, and I'm going to keep pushing on it, because right now the most effective time to put messaging out into the community is before you ask them for anything. That's absolutely the critical time. That's when they believe it. That's when they trust you. That's when they start building relationships with you, because they know that you're not there on some other agenda. You are, but they don't know that, right? And they're willing to accept anything that you basically tell them. Okay. This surfacing phase is incredibly, incredibly important. The other thing about a surfacing phase of a campaign is one of the litmus tests to tell if an organization is politicking or not, that shouldn't be politicking, is if they were doing something previous to a campaign, or did they start it after the campaign was announced. So like a lot of libraries that we work with, we tell them, look, if you're not running Facebook ads right now, and you're a year out from your campaign, start running them right now, because when your campaign comes, if you suddenly start running Facebook ads during that campaign, that's going to be a red flag to somebody about whether or not you're campaigning, okay? And the library can't campaign because they're a government organization. They can't tell people to vote yes, right? And so start doing these things now, because later on, if somebody's like, hey, you're doing this new thing, no, we've always done it, right? Okay. Always, the goal of our messaging is not to get more users. It's to get more supporters. This often causes a little like emotional crisis for me, because as a librarian, I want everybody to use the library. But if we're talking about building up political power in order to activate people to take action on our behalf so we can get the funding that we need, it's about supporters, it's not about users. Users and supporters are different things, okay? That's really, really important to understand. We've kind of talked a lot about the problems with our data, that we have none. But let's talk about like that report from Awareness to Funding that came out in 2008, which means all the data was collected in 2007, which was pre-recession, pre-Obama, pre-Tea Party, pre-Trump, pre-Occupy Wall Street, right? So that data is slipping really fast. That data needs to be recycled year after year after year, or biannually at least, right? Every other year. That's incredibly crucial because there is vote slippage, right? People just change their opinions over time on things. And people change their opinion on time, and people change their opinion over time on things specifically because other campaigns are surfacing their campaigns, right? All this stuff that happened with medical marijuana is a great example. People didn't just show up, put something on the ballot, and then run a campaign. The lead up to medical marijuana, I know a lot of people that were behind it. I've met them in campaigns in California, and they've been working on it for 5 years before it ever got on the ballot. 10 years before it ever got on the ballot. That's that surfacing phase of their campaign, right? And so because everybody is surfacing, everybody's moving their agenda forward, there's just vote slippage, and we have to understand that. We have to understand how the electorate moves year after year after year. Local data matters. We kind of already talked about that, right? We have to get local data. We have no idea about public libraries, but we even have less of an idea about county law libraries, okay? And I think that should be one of the things that I want you guys to take away from here is who supports you and why, and how are we going to figure that out? Who's going to take action on your behalf? Why are they going to do it? What do they care about? And what are we going to do about that, right? Because you guys, there's no data about that. And that should be pretty eye-opening and pretty scary. 3% of 5% isn't a lot of people. So where can we find and build our own data? We just went through that. Thank you, David. So let's get into some messaging techniques, right? So the first one is this problem agitation solution model. This is a model of message development that you will see if you are on anybody's campaign email list, right? Hillary, Trump, whatever your political flavor of choice is, every single email that you get will be in this problem agitation solution model of messaging. And this is the way that you move people up in order to get them to make donations or volunteer. This is the way you get them to move up that ladder of engagement, which we'll talk about later today too. But basically how this works is you state a problem, right? And then you agitate it in that, how does this problem directly impact that person? How does it put them at risk? How does it set up some danger, some fear receptors? How does it make them afraid? And then you alleviate that fear by providing the solution, which is county law, right? And so you see this in a lot of email campaigns that are asking for donations, because what happens is when they make that donation, they actually get like a dopamine hit, a relief from that agitation, right? And that's what drives people. Like there's a psychological response in people. You initiate their fight or flight response, and then you relieve them of that danger by allowing them to make a donation or volunteer or take action, right? By setting up this thing. So like, for example, a problem, and I'm going to use public libraries because honestly that's what I'm familiar with, but we'll have you guys think of, maybe somebody can think of one in their own head for county law, but problem is there's a significant population of children who are growing up illiterate in our community, right? That's the problem. Now we all have our own agitation in our mind about why it is that that's a problem, but we want to spell that out for people, right? A lot of campaigns that we work with are just like, the kids are illiterate, and then that's all they say to them, okay? And they walk away. They don't provide the library as a solution, and they don't talk about why that's a direct problem for them, okay? Libraries Transform does this a lot too. They state a problem and they kind of walk away from it, right? And they assume that people connect the dots between that problem and the library, but we want to connect it for them. So you state a problem, the children are illiterate, okay? That's a problem because illiteracy rates cost this much in tax dollars. It costs you this much in tax dollars. Children who are illiterate are more likely to lead a life of crime. They're more likely to break into your house and steal your stuff, okay? How do we keep your stuff safe? You come to Storytime. You bring your kids to Storytime, okay? And if you use this problem agitation solution model, from everything from Storytime to trying to get donations to trying to get volunteers or whatever, you won't have to do what most library marketing does, and that's come to Storytime, it's at 10 p.m. Or that's real late for kids, sorry. I don't know why I said 10 p.m. Come to Storytime, it's at 6 p.m., okay? If you use this problem agitation solution model, they will just find out what time Storytime is because it's so important to them, right? Our kids aren't as successful as they should be. Getting kids a head start on literacy, learning, lifelong learning, blah, 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 helps them grow and become more successful or whatever, bring them to Storytime. So you can build out these problem agitation solution models for a lot of different things. I'm really picking on Storytime, but there's a lot of different things that you can use it for. And what I really recommend is that you do get onto like some national campaigns email list and just read their emails because they always follow this model over and over and over again because it's so effective. And they follow like maybe more complicated ones where they kind of restate problem, blah, 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 but it's always problem, agitation, solution. Here's a problem, here's how it affects you, here's how it's gonna impact your life, here's why you should be scared of this thing, give us $5. You give them $5 and you're like, oh, fix that, next email, you know? And that's why that works. So how about this? Like, let's try an exercise real quick. I'm going to give you guys a minute, and you can try and come up with a problem agitation solution model that you want to share with the class. Raise your hand if anybody wants to share theirs. Go ahead, David.
I have one for law schools, that's where I work at.
Great.
So problem would be for graduating students that still don't have professional level research skills as first year associates. And the agitation is that this is costing money to law firms, it's impacting our law school ranking, it's impacting our reputation in our local legal market, and the solution is that librarians should be more integrated into skills training for law students to improve their research skills.
Yeah, sure. Okay, no, this is great. So that first half was great. Let's talk about your solution a little bit, because what we want to give them is an immediate thing that they can do. What immediate thing can they do to help solve it? What is something that you need in order to integrate? Is there something that they can sign? Is there some assessment? Is there some petition? Is there some donation? Is there a way that they can volunteer? Can they contact somebody? What concrete action?
Would be, of course, the law school dean and the faculty.
There you go.
So those are the people that we're trying to persuade.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think our solution would be that our services should be more integrated into the overall skills curriculum for the law school.
Right.
Invite a librarian to your class.
Sure, yeah, great. Invite a librarian to your class and they can talk about it. Or contact the dean and let them know that you care about this issue. Here's an email to send them, right? Great.
Okay. We're the shills in the audience here.
Sure, okay.
For
My plans.
the county law libraries. Joe has a custody problem and he can't afford a lawyer. And this affects all of us because it's an access to justice issue. Lots of middle-income Americans can't afford lawyers. What do? You go to our special family law, in the case of Sacramento, family law, satellite, and they'll show you how to use the books to prepare the right paperwork that you need.
Yeah,
It's
good.
wordy, but that's basically
Yeah.
the library, and we'll show you what books so that you can fill it out yourself.
Great, good. So one thing to think about this one, okay? And one of the things that we want to try and steer away from is how this affects everybody. The reason that we break down those audiences with that data is that we understand the issues that that audience cares about. So what audience would we be talking to? We don't want to affect everybody. This impacts you, specifically you, right? And then you're like, oh, me, and then you, whatever you got to do, right? And so we want to be, so yes, that's really good. We just want to narrow down the audience that we're talking to.
Joe's kids
and then,
with his abusive ex-wife.
okay, sure, all right, yeah. Great, anybody else? Yeah.
Similar to that last one. So, and this would be the county law library. So the problem would be the courts are being inundated by ill-prepared pro per litigants. The agitation is for the judges, it's costing the judges time, money, and a lot of patience. So the solution is to get the judges, the California Judicial Council, to lobby the local, state, and federal government to create grants that set up workshops or some kind of clinic.
Great. There you go. That was a good one. That was very good. That was very good. Anybody else? He just solved your problems, by the way, so that's great. Yeah. Next.
For a private librarians, we're very, very different in our needs. Our problem would be, I've just been put on a case. This case is helping a client in antitrust. No idea how to do antitrust. The agitation is now I have a partner and 3 other senior associates who are staring down at me answering this question. The solution, go to your library, they'll give you the needs.
Mm-hmm. Great. Yeah, have people imagine themselves in that scenario, right? Yeah. Mm-hmm. Cool. One more? Somebody have one more?
Well, I mean, a law firm example, that the problem is that we're wasting money by, having first-year associates or even, beyond that are billing hours and they're not being as productive as they could be without the assistance of a law firm librarian. And it's really hurting the law firm's bottom line, effectively utilizing library services.
Yeah. And the solution is?
Is to push library services to first-year associates, have them take a more active role in orientation programs for their new hires.
Good. Cool. Great. Oh, one more. Yeah.
Well, it's not one more.
Sure.
Kind of negative, but, so what happens if you have a problem in a target audience, you need to reach for that problem, they don't care. I was going to say it more profanely.
Yeah.
Because that's a lot of what happens. Our supervisors don't care.
Mhm.
Oh, why does it bother me? I've got all these other people with other problems.
Yeah. So,
What do you do with that?
well, yes. So the issue, this goes back to the data piece, right? And a couple of different things. So we don't know why they should care. And if we don't understand why they should care, then we have a real problem ourselves. That's not their problem, that's our problem. We need to understand why it is that they should care. And if we can't communicate that effectively because we don't have the data, then that's a real issue, right? And a lot of times when we see people like doing advocacy stuff and they're like, oh, they just don't care. And it's like, well, it's not that they don't care. It's that you didn't talk to them in their language about an issue that they care about. And one of the things that we'll talk about this again later too, is that the way you build support for something isn't getting somebody to change their minds about some other issue. It's connecting your issue to things that they already care about, right? And so like if somebody cares about education, how can we connect libraries to this thing to the education initiative that they care about? We're not changing their mind about libraries. We're just, whenever they think about education, they think as libraries as part of the solution now, right? Okay. And if we can't figure that out because we don't have the data, we don't understand that audience, we don't know the things that they care about, then that's a whole other problem. That's not a problem with the message. That's a problem with us not understanding them and their needs, right? And that's also kind of out of like the sales world, right? Have you guys seen that movie, Wolf of Wall Street? Do you guys see that movie? And there's that scene where he says like, "Sell me this pen," right? Do you guys remember that? And he's like, "Well, write down your name. I don't have a pen. Here you go," And if we don't understand that they're missing a pen, then we can't make that, like that was why that worked so well, was because we understood their need for a pen. And we had that solution, right? Okay. So data and stories again. Not data, stories. We can back up stories with good data, and we can make stories bigger with good data. So when I worked in East Palo Alto, and how many of you are familiar with East Palo Alto and the history behind East Palo Alto, right? This was, they had Carlmont High School before they shut down Carlmont High School. Carlmont High School was the high school that they filmed that movie Dangerous Minds about. So if you're unfamiliar with East Palo Alto, that was the community that it is. It's strangely this weird enclave in the middle of Silicon Valley that for whatever reason, for a lot of institutionalized racism issues, really spiraled out of control. We had an after-school program called Quest, and Quest worked with students after school from 2nd grade to 5th grade. You had to enroll in it. They had 80 students every year, and you had to enroll in it. And every year, students were able to move up 2 grade point levels, right? 2 grade point levels in reading. Okay, it was a literacy program. Now that story's okay, but now here's the other story. I talked about 80 kids, 2 grade point levels, blah, 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 blah. Now here's the other side of that story, right? We had a kid come in who was in 2nd grade, hated reading, was failing 2nd grade. His parents worked 2 jobs. They couldn't teach him how to read. They couldn't bring him to story time. He was kind of a latchkey kid. He had nowhere to go. So he started coming to Quest, where we taught him sight words, right? Everybody knows sight words, is, and, or, the, but, right? Once you learn the first 1,000 sight words, you're essentially a reader. We taught him the first 1,000 sight words through games and activities. He didn't really know he was learning, but he learned them. He got really into historical fiction. When he got older, he became a really avid reader of actual history. He wound up getting a full ride scholarship to Stanford on a history degree, right? And now, which story was more impactful? The one where I told you the numbers, or the one where I told you the story? Okay. And so I know you guys have these stories, and there are issues around telling them, or those privacy issues, but I didn't tell you the name of that kid, right? I didn't tell you anything personal about that. Like, you couldn't go out and find that kid, really. I didn't tell you what year it happened or anything. None of that identifying information was important to the story, okay? I could have just made that story up. I didn't. But I could have just made that story up, right? Like that was some kid. And so I know you guys have those kinds of stories of impact, and it's really important to figure out some way to collect those and share them. And I'll talk about where they fit into the model, because it's not, you don't use them all the time, you use them in important areas. But how many of you guys have a story like that, or a great story that you helped somebody come in, maybe they're getting kicked out of their house or their apartment, you helped them get some connections to like tenants' rights, they were able to stay in their home or whatever, right? Does anybody have a good story they want to share?
The challenge we have in county law libraries is that our contact is so transactional.
Yeah.
You followed that kid for 12 to 10 years.
Sure.
We get somebody for 2 hours, maybe, and they don't come back and tell us their success story or their failure. They might tell us how much they appreciated what we did for them right then, but we don't have an effective, easy way to track their success stories.
Yeah.
We just don't have built-in constituents. If they find us, it's because there's a problem, but then problems resolved, problem fails, whatever it is, they're gone. So it's a lot different than another kind of entity where you know who your constituents are and you can rely on them for this kind of information.
But can't you use the story in that moment? I mean, like, we have those moments where we're like, I have no idea who the client is, I have no idea what their issue is, but somebody has come to me with a problem. They need to find more tenant, so obviously something's probably wrong. And we found the nature. Now, did that work out for them or not? But we satisfied the need at that point. Can't we use that as
Sure. Absolutely.
we don't need the continuation.
And you can even use, just going back to our problem agitation solution model even, you just brought up a good one. More and more Americans, and especially millennials, are renting now, right? They're unable to buy homes. Tenants' rights are becoming a much more significant issue for millennials, right? So you can send out a problem agitation solution model to millennials to get them to sign a petition to support your legislative agenda with something like, so-and-so came in, they had a problem because their landlord was trying to illegally evict them. We were able to help them find information that helped prove that they're illegally being evicted. This could happen to any of you, right? You could be illegally evicted as more and more millennials are renting homes. Don't let this happen to you. We're here. We're a service that you can rely on. Sign this petition to your legislators, right? And that's using the problem agitation solutions model mixed with a story, right? That story of impact. Okay, does that make sense to people? Right? And so thinking about these things like you don't have to, like my story, that story with that kid is a severe outlier in the data. Those 80 kids that go into Quest every single year, they don't go to Stanford, right? Like 2 or 3 of them do. Some of them do much better in school. We help increase the high school graduation rate. The kids who go through Quest are more likely to graduate high school. All those kinds of things. They don't all get a full ride scholarship to Stanford on a history degree. But I tell that story and then I say, and then 80 kids go through that program. And everybody's like, wow, 80 kids go to Stanford. I don't fix that for them, right? But I mean that's the conversation that you can have, okay? Yeah, does anybody have any other questions on that kind of stuff? Great, okay.
Well, actually, I do have a follow-up.
Yeah.
Because Mark brought up how transactional a lot of our work is, and I'm curious if we follow up with some of our patrons, if there's some mechanism for us to follow up with patrons. I know that there's probably some risk in that we may not follow up with some problem patrons that if we follow up with them, it's just going to encourage them to come back. But
it's true public libraries too, yeah.
If there is some way that we can follow up with patrons so we can collect some of these stories in an effective way, and how we can think about doing that.
Yeah. I'm sure there are, right? Getting their emails from them when they're answering those questions, following up a month later. Did that information work out for you? Did you get everything that you needed from us? You can do an online. You can send them a poll under the guise of a survey. Did our services satisfy your needs and in what way? And then they can tell you how, and then you have the fill out of the story, right? Sure, I'm sure there's lots of mechanisms for that. Yeah, absolutely. Great.
With your story, public libraries are just as transactional as, and of those 80 students in that thing, that one came back to you and told you the story.
Yeah.
But you don't know of the 37th one who also did the same thing, but you didn't hear about that one.
Right.
So it's the same problem. You just happen to luck out on that transactional, because it's not quite as transactional, because public libraries do sometimes have a lot of repeaters, whereas county law libraries especially have one-offers.
Yeah. Well, so yeah, absolutely, and a couple. I mean, that brings up a couple other things. It's really fascinating to me how many different libraries we work with that think that they are wildly unique from every other library that we worked with, and in almost no case is it the same. Like I'm going over a lot of political theory that I'm telling you public library stories, but the underlying theory of problem agitation solution can be applied to any kind of library, right? That's not dependent upon the library. When we talk about ladders of engagement, that's not dependent upon the kind of the library. That's not unique to public libraries. I'm just bringing out public library stories because that's what I generally work with. And I know you guys, and there is a transactional nature. And when we talk to these libraries, you guys haven't said anything new to me. Well, we don't do this, and we don't do it. Nothing that you guys have said to me aren't things that I've had public libraries tell me or any other kind of library tell me. We go into one library and they're literally on the other side of a park from another library, and they tell us they're not anything like those people. We're completely different than those people on that side of the park, and they're exactly the same. The questions are the same, the problems are the same, the political power building theories that you apply are exactly the same, right? Okay.
You're telling us that we're not unique?
You are. Presenting a vision of the future. So What if we are asking people to take an action on our behalf? What do they get back, right? What kinds of things do they get from taking this action? I mean, we did the problem agitation solution. You get less people committing crimes in your community because they all went to story time when they were kids, right? I mean, that's the problem agitation solution model. But how do we give them a vision of the future? And a lot of times libraries are scared of sharing other library success stories. And sharing other library success stories can help libraries that are underfunded give visions of what a library could be, right? Isn't it amazing that that library over there is doing a makerspace? If only we could do a makerspace, we could help children we can help young women get more inclined to get involved in STEM, right? We can get more women involved in engineering or whatever it is. If only we had a makerspace, right? That's a vision of a future. We don't have a makerspace now, but if I'm not telling them what it is that they get from their tax money, if I'm not telling them what they get from taxing themselves, then we haven't given that vision of the future, right? Like, I mean, going back to even like medical marijuana, which is an issue that's been going on for a long time. The big solution, the big talking point was, well, we'll be able to tax it, and then we'll have more revenue for California, right? And that was the big talk. That was a vision of the future. If we do this, we will have more tax revenue for Californians. We'll have less crime because we'll have decriminalized marijuana. It'll cost us less for blah, blah, blah. That's the vision of the future that they gave for us to vote for, right? And if we have to give that to our legislators, like, what is it that legislators get? How is this going to make their lives easier? How is it going to make them a better California? How is it going to support things in the future? I don't have all those answers for county law libraries. I just don't. But I'm 100% sure that they're like the few stories that we've heard do paint a vision of a future. If you do something at your county law library, share that story with as many people as you possibly can so that they can take those stories on as their own as well, right? In another presentation that I give on professional networking, we talk about the Princess Bride. How many of you guys are familiar with the Princess Bride, right? Okay, good. So Wesley's gone for only 5 years, but the real Dread Pirate Roberts had been marauding for 15, right? But he came back as Dread Pirate Roberts, right? How was that? It was because the real Dread Pirate Roberts gave him his cape and cloak and referred to him as that, and all that mythos went with him. Well, that's really just addressing imposter syndrome. Like that's just a fairy tale about imposter syndrome. That's all it is. And so and the thing about libraries is we have thousands of years of history and mythos behind librarianship that we all have as our own cape and cloak, is our own way for people to refer to us as Dread Pirate Roberts, right? We have that business card, whatever, that makes us librarians. We have all of that history behind us. Not just law libraries, not just public libraries, not just school libraries, not just private libraries, but we can tell all those stories as our own. Like, this is the amazing stuff that libraries do. That's our vision of the future, right? That's our vision going forward. And so if you guys aren't sharing your stories with each other, we've got to figure out some platform for doing it, even if it's just a Google Doc, even if it's just on your listserv. This is an amazing thing that happened in my library that people can then share with their own constituents, with their own people when they go out and talk, right? You all have ownership over the same issues, whether you're a private law library or a public law library or a school library or whatever, okay? You can take all those on your own. All right, so we're going to dive a little bit deeper into the ladder of engagement because this really comes into play here. We have people who are unaware of an issue, as we talked about before. Let me take you through Obama's ladder of engagement. Obama's ladder of engagement, years before he was running for office, he had like the Obama Facebook page, okay? He had somebody running the Obama Facebook page. This is a ladder of engagement specifically for Facebook, but you can apply it to other things. And what they did is they ran ads to a specific audience about things that they knew that audience cared about, and they ran those ads connecting Obama's values to the issue that they care about. And Facebook has a ton of data that you can build this stuff out with. You know, people care about education, so they could talk about Obama's views on education to these audiences. Once they had that audience aware of who Obama was, they asked them to like his Facebook page, right? So they liked people from that specific audience to like his Facebook page. It's really, really hard to get somebody to like your Facebook page if they don't know anything about you, right? Like if I just put up a Facebook page and ask people to like me, they wouldn't because they don't know who I am, right? And this is the big part of building out an aware audience. The bigger the aware audience that you have, the more people you're going to be able to get to the end of the whole thing. So they educated this audience about Obama, then they asked them to like his Facebook page, okay? By getting people to like his Facebook page, they now had a brand new audience of people who were educated about Obama. Once they had that audience of people who were educated about Obama, they then send them an ad on Obama's birthday asking them to sign Obama's birthday card, right? Once people took that next action, which is really like a next level action, a bigger action, to sign his birthday card, you just gave the campaign your name, your address, your phone number, your email address, right? They now have all of those data points on you. So now what they can do is they can go to the enhanced voter file. They can attach all of the data from the enhanced voter file, so they know your consumer profiles, they know whether or not you're willing to, you're somebody who volunteers for charities, you're somebody who donates to charities, whether or not you drive a red Subaru or a blue Lexus, whether or not you subscribe to Forbes magazines or Outdoor World or whatever, right? And they can build profiles of all the people now that sign that birthday card. Then they segment that audience again, and they look at all the people who sign that, and they ask them to do some next thing, right? They then sent them more messages about something deeper that they care about. Like, Obama really cares about the Arctic spotted chinchilla or whatever it is that person cares about. And don't you care about it too? Help us fight for the Arctic spotted chinchilla. Won't you make a $5 donation today, or won't you help Obama fight by volunteering at his campaign office at whatever address, blah, 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 right? And that's how they move people up to this cycle, all the way up to become advocates for Barack Obama, right? They didn't change their opinion of who he was. They just told them who he was and then attached Obama to their already held beliefs, okay? And this is how a ladder of engagement works in a lot of different ways. Does anybody have any questions about that? So let me use a library model on this. So everybody knows that Donald Trump proposed cutting federal funding for libraries through the IMLS, right? Everybody's aware of that? I asked that because this is the second time he's done it, so more people are aware. But the first time when we were first talking about this, even librarians didn't really know what IMLS was, right? Like, we don't have a big audience of what people who are aware of the Institute of Museum and Library Services, the federally funded government organization. We just don't. And we especially don't have an aware audience of that in the general public. Now, the Republicans had cut IMLS out of the Republican blueprint budget for the last 5 years. They've cut it. In that 5 years, we, as an industry, everybody's guilty of this, didn't tell anybody what IMLS was. We spent no money. We knew it was coming. As soon as they controlled the branches of government, they were going to cut it. It was in the blueprint, 5 years. We didn't spend any time telling stories of impact about IMLS. We didn't spend any time educating people about IMLS, so that when it finally did get cut, we only had an audience of maybe 150,000 Americans who even knew that IMLS existed, okay? Which means we then spent a ton of money getting that 150,000 people to take some kind of action. Between us and ALA, we got around 20 to 25,000 people to send emails and sign petitions and that kind of stuff, okay? Because that's about the 5 to 7% that we could realistically get out of an educated audience, right? 5 to 7%, that's only 25,000 people, which is like 0.0001% of Americans, right? Which is nothing, which makes it still a soft issue, which is why it got cut again this time, right? It wouldn't have got cut again this time if we had spent that 5 years educating people about what IMLS is, telling the amazing things that IMLS does for like tribal libraries, telling the great things that IMLS does for rural libraries, rebuilding technology in libraries so people have access to government services so they can get jobs, told all those stories of impact. If we did a big media campaign the last 5 years about it, if they ever tried to cut it, we would have gotten hundreds of thousands of signatures, and they never would have dared cut it again, right? And that was our failing. And that's all just part of this ladder of engagement. That's a failure of us not following this model, right? Every library didn't do it. We've been around long enough. We should have been doing it. ALA's been around definitely long enough. They definitely should have been doing it. But no state associations Nobody was talking about it, right? And that was all our fault.
Okay, let me tell you my own letter of engagement story.
Sure, yeah.
Okay. I have a progressive political viewpoint. And I have a Facebook account. So I'll get, a little blurb saying, do you support this and this and this, which is being killed by Trump? Yes, I support this thing. So then it takes me to another page where it says, they're doing evil things, da-da-da-da-da, we need your help. Can we have your help? Done. Okay. Then it takes me to the next page where the Democratic National Committee wants me to send money. I have stopped looking at these kinds of Facebook blurbs because, especially if they look like they might be from the Democratic National Committee, because I know that they're going to ask me for money. And I'm a committed Democrat. So is there a wrong way to put these things together?
No, I mean, no. Well, no. Yes, there is a wrong way to put them together. I don't think that's it, because we followed the same model, and when we ran the IMLS campaign, we were able to raise $6 for every dollar we spent on it. So
it felt like it was dishonest because they were hiding the hand with the palm out behind two separate click pages.
Yeah, but so that you're absolutely right. But you are now educated about that. This is why a fundraising thing doesn't last forever. This is why fundraisers and those kinds of people stay in business, is because, and political consultants, because the goalposts are always moving. Because an audience that you're a part of, whatever that audience is now aware of following this specific thing. So now we've got to get at them another way. And then we've got to figure out a new way to get them. It's all going to follow the ladder of engagement. It's all going to follow problem, agitation, solution. But we're going to have to find some other way to talk to you, right? And having them take you through that model might not work, but a phone call might. A piece of direct mail might. A knock on your door might. A lot of other methods of engagement and talking to you might, right? You might just be tapped out and tired of giving to the DNC, and that's it. And so you're going to give to another progressive organization instead of them, right? And so that's also a piece of it.
Well, the other thing that occurred to me is, how do I know this really is the DNC on the other end?
That's also true, right?
You want me to click this and give them my,
Yeah.
credit card number?
Yeah. Yeah, and so we're seeing this a lot. Like, this is like the email slippage that a lot of political consultants are talking about. Like, how many of you guys are willing to give out your email address, right? And so you just aren't anymore. Even email addresses are getting difficult to get. And we'll talk about it later, but email is the absolute key to the internet, and it's getting harder and harder to get access to that key for a lot of people, right? And there's a lot of ways to get it, but it's getting more and more difficult, which is going back to that GOP poll that was like, do you think the unfair media is unfair to Trump? Yes? Yeah, good. Submit the survey, just put your email here, right? That's what they're doing. They're not out to do anything else. They're out to get your emails. That's what that GOP poll is about, okay? And so like we run surveys now. We don't try and collect emails the same ways that we did when we started this organization. We are now running like surveys. We are now running polls. We are now running petitions. We are now doing a bunch of other activities in order to get access to emails, access to new donors, all that kind of same stuff. Because there's just that donor fatigue. There's that email fatigue. It just happens. Yeah. And you also have to remember, like, so the other thing you have to remember, we're a room of intellectuals. We are a room of people who have been educated. We are a room of people who are of decent affluence, right? And for the general public, we're not it, okay? So I'll just go on another rant real quick. Sometimes it drives me nuts when librarians are like, our most effective fundraising email was the worst thing I've ever written. The subject line was, I can't believe my neighbor told me this, right? Which is just brutal. Like, I cringed writing it. But we've never had a more successful fundraising email. And it was just about John talking to his next door neighbor who didn't know something about libraries. And we said, we're trying to educate people about libraries. Can you give us $10 today? And it was brutal to write for me as like an educated, not upper really, but middle-class American, whatever. Yeah, because like that's what people respond to. It's why their rhetoric is getting more and more hyperbolic, right? It's why they're talking about more and more extremes. It's why so-and-so's going to kill everybody. They're going to take your guns, blah, 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 blah. That's why they're doing that, is because you didn't give when you said, could we please have some money to please protect your guns sometimes? Thanks. You know, like, that's why they do that, because you respond to that. Okay? All right. So audiences, voter universes. So we've gone over this a bunch. Trump, 1,200 separate and distinct audiences. What was really fascinating to me when I learned this directly from Brad Parscale, who is the guy who ran the Trump digital campaign. Okay, he was on a panel with, and I don't remember her name because they lost, Hillary's campaign digital director. I don't remember her name. Sorry, honestly, but they were on a panel together, and they had like a couple of other people with them who helped run their digital campaigns. Between them, they were responsible for spending, I forgot, $500 million in digital ads. It was somewhere between $500 and $600 billion is what they spent on digital ads. And what Hillary's team didn't do was create these separate and distinct audiences to the same level that Brad's did with the help of the Russians or whatever, right? So I'm just kidding. Like, knowing these audiences and having the data about them is exactly how you can develop messages for them. And I'll talk about why here in just a second. So you've got to know them. You've got to know who they are. Can you guys tell me what you think some of your audiences might be who might care about county law libraries? Attorneys? Sure. Why?
Because although they're not the patrons that need the most help, they do use the resources and they understand them and know them. Or, you know, not like a librarian would, but...
It's because they're already here.
Yeah.
Right. Great. Cool. What else?
The courts, because they can send people who are confused to us.
Mm-hmm. Great. What else?
Our county supervisors who know about us but sometimes don't want to fund us.
Mm-hmm. Good. Yeah.
Legal publishers, because they want to make sure that there's money to buy the product.
Great. Good. Nobody's going to talk about their users?
I was going to say small business person.
Small business. It's a privacy issue. We're not talking about it. Yeah. Small business owners. Great. Yeah.
People needing to help themselves with legal matters.
Mm-hmm. People needing to help themselves with legal matters. Sure. So now, how could we build an audience out of those kinds of people, right? And there's a lot of different ways to do it. How many of you guys have a website? Okay. How many of you guys have, and I forgot what Google calls it, the Google bit of script on your website that tells you the Google Analytics stuff, right? You guys all have that? How many of you guys have a Facebook pixel on your website? A couple of you guys? How many of you guys use your Facebook pixel? Right? Do you run Facebook ads?
No.
Okay. Tell me how you use your Facebook pixel.
Well, if I'm understanding Pixel, I mean, we have a Facebook account, we have a Facebook icon on our website.
Oh, no. Oh, yeah. So I'm sorry. A Facebook pixel is a little piece of code that you can put on your website that tells Facebook people that click on your website, okay? And what you can do with this that's really interesting is anybody who clicks on your website, Facebook will create an audience with them, and you can run ads to people who click on your website, okay? So this is a way to create an audience of those users. Now Facebook will create it. This isn't a Facebook lecture, but I'm going to dive into it, okay? We have time, right? Okay. So, okay, great. All right, so you can create an audience of people in Facebook of just the people who went to your website. If you go to business.facebook.com and sign your library up for that, that's a huge set of tools from Facebook that you can use. It's different than just running ads off the front page, signing up to run it. It's a deeper level of stuff. It's all free. But you set this pixel up, and then everybody who clicks on that, Facebook knows who they are, and it creates audience profiles of them, and you can actually look at the data and see the trends of what kind of people are clicking on your website, so that you can create lookalike audiences of the kinds of people who click on your website, so that you can run ads specifically to those kinds of people all over the place. Okay.
You can purchase Facebook ads for only those people
Yeah.
that visited your library website?
I can run a Facebook ad that only you will see. Yeah. Again, this isn't a Facebook thing, but let's dive into it a little bit, because it's a great model that we can talk about here. Everybody's familiar with Facebook. So you can do a lot of amazing stuff with creating audiences and segmenting audiences through Facebook. That's why it's been so effective. You can run ads on the back end. They're called dark ads. This is what the Russians got in all that trouble for running, right? These are called dark ads that only specific people will ever see, because they're not on your front page. There's no organic reach to it. So I can actually, if I get a list of people and all I have is their name, their zip code, and their phone number, Facebook will connect that to their Facebook profile with a 90% accuracy rate, and I can target them with ads, okay? Not only can I target that audience with ads, but if I go to a tool called Audience Insights, I can see what kind of demographic profiles, anonymized, their trends that make that up. So are they consumers of this kind of stuff? What kind of other pages do they generally like? What kind of consumer profiles do they have? Are they charitable donors? Are they buying houses? Are they not buying houses? Do they own houses? Do they have kids? Do they not have kids? And I can build out lookalike audiences to each one of those, and then I can run ads specifically to those people, okay? And this is just knowing and segmenting your audiences. This is just a part of building out all those different audiences to target them with messages that they care about. So if you notice, for example, you put a pixel on your website, you find out, you build an audience from it in Facebook, you look at Audience Insights, you find out that all those people have kids, right? Now you target them with a message about whatever it is that you got, whatever value proposition you have around children. You can target them with an ad with a problem agitation solution model in order to engage them to sign a petition to support the library legislative agenda that you guys have, right? And that's well, that's everything. We're done. That's really it. Yeah.
I just want to say that Facebook actually has a page called Facebook Blueprint. Which
Yes.
is short courses.
Yes.
Do all this.
It's amazing. Yeah. Yeah, it's all free. So you can also get even deeper Facebook audiences from a company called Axiom. Axiom is responsible for managing pretty much all the digital data in the world, in the country at least. They're contracted even by like the DoD to manage this data. Twitter uses it, Yahoo uses it, Bing uses it, all kinds of stuff. And you can actually go to a Facebook data guru. If you just Google Facebook or Axiom Data Guru, you fill out a form and you tell them what kind of audiences you want them to put in your Facebook to run ads to. So I ask them all the time for like voters. I ask them for charitable donors if we're doing a fundraising drive. I ask them for whatever. But you can even ask them, I want everybody in my community who subscribes to Forbes magazine, you know, and they'll load an audience in your Facebook of everybody who subscribes to Forbes magazine. It's completely free, okay? And it's completely free because Axiom makes money off every single ad that's run on Facebook. That's how they're paid, because they manage all the back-end data for Facebook.
How do you spell Axiom?
ACXIOM. Yeah. And so that's all about, like, all we're talking about here is just segmenting these audiences. That was a really, really deep dive into the Facebook model of it, but there's a lot of different ways to segment these audiences. If you have the LexisNexis suite and you have A to Z databases, right? You said you get A to Z databases with LexisNexis. Then you should really dive into that, because you can actually build out lists of your community by charitable donors, by political people with a conservative or a liberal political agenda. You can look at different consumer profiles, and you can upload those lists into Facebook, because it'll give you their name, their address, their phone number, their
Carry California voting lists.
it does not. But you can get those from Axiom. So you just have Axiom load that vote. That's where we get our voter file from in our Facebook. So we just have Axiom upload the list of all the voters into our Facebook, and we run ads to voters, and we break it down for different communities, whatever. Yeah. So segmenting these audiences is just like the absolute key to doing messaging. Everything else I talk about messaging isn't going to be effective unless we do it this way. And I'm going to bag on Libraries Transform for just a minute, because the thing that drives me nuts about it, like one of them is because you can't afford textbooks on a ramen noodle diet. That's one of the sayings in like the Libraries Transform things. But if I put that out in front of everybody in my community, right, it loses its value. If I spend a nickel, like when we go back and talk about 26% of the yes voters, the maybe voters, and the no voters, if I spend a penny of my ad spend and putting ads in front of a no voter, I've wasted that penny, right? If I spend a penny putting a persuasion ad in front of a yes audience, I've wasted that penny. That penny should have gone to persuading that middle 37%. And so if I can figure out how to do that, through segmenting these audiences, through all that back-end data, my messages suddenly become really, really, really effective. The ROI goes straight up, you know? And if I can segment that middle 37%, and I know this 3% of that middle 37% cares about this issue, and I send them a message about this issue that I know will care if you can't afford textbooks on ramen noodle diets because they're all college kids, then maybe that's a better spend of using, or that's a better way to use Libraries Transform, right? I'm gonna complain about Libraries Transform and Geek the Library a little bit more too later. But does that make sense to everybody, right? Segmenting these audiences? Okay. So A/B testing. How many of you are familiar with A/B testing for messaging? Great. Anybody want to say what it is out loud? Okay, so A/B testing. This is really great for email marketing especially, and it's easiest to understand through email marketing, but you can do it in a lot of different ways. So if you have an email sending out like that one that I sent out that said, I can't believe my neighbor told me this, right? And then my other one is I send out, that's the subject line, I can't believe my neighbor told me this. And I have 1,000 people in my email. Then what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna take 100 of those people and I'm gonna split it up into two groups of 50, okay? And one group of that 50 is gonna get, I can't believe my neighbor did this. My other one is people don't know about libraries, because that was really what the email was about. People don't know about libraries. I'm gonna test those two to that 100 group, those two groups of 50. Whichever one performs the best is what I send to the other 900 people. And I don't send that first 50, okay? And by doing this kind of stuff over and over and over again, by sending out these emails like this over and over and over again, we can really get an idea of what kinds of things people respond to, right? We can start understanding that people just overwhelmingly respond to, I can't believe my neighbor told me this, and they don't respond to, people don't know about libraries, right? And that's how we understand that data. We did it in Sunnyvale because we did a direct mail campaign. And direct mail is notoriously hard and complicated in order to get correct, in order to get a return on it, because the return isn't very high and they're very expensive to send. So especially with things that are like that, with direct mail, doing A/B testing is really important. So what we did is we went to A to Z databases. We got a list of everybody who lived in a zip code, their name and their address. And we went to our ILS and we got everybody in that who lived in that zip code who had a library card. And so we were able to look at who didn't have a library card in that zip code, okay? We were able to create a list of everybody who lived in that zip code that didn't have a library card. And then what we did is we ran and we just took a random 1,000 segment of it, and into 100 people we sent one piece of direct mail without somebody's face on it and with a slightly different message, and for another piece of direct mail we send out the same thing with a face and a slightly different wording. The one that came back with the most library card signups was the one that we sent out to the other 800 in this case, right? Just because direct mail is so expensive. And so that's essentially A/B testing. And if you're running messaging, if you're talking about advocacy, if you're talking about engaging people, and you're talking about like limited resources, which we all have, this is how you stretch those limited resources out to target your messaging to audiences to make them the most effective. Yeah. Language, we dove real deep into that one in the next one, and the last thing, so I'm not going to go too much into it except to show you these here. And let me make sure this works. Sounds like it.
one time, I made things, and I took pride in the things I made. And my belts whirred, and my engines cranked. I opened my doors to all, and together, we filled pallets and trucks. I was mighty. And then one day, the gears stopped turning. But I'm still here, and I believe I will rise again. We will build things, and build families, and build dreams. It's time to get back to what America does best. Because work is a beautiful thing.
Okay, so that actually, I found out after I put this all together that this was actually a. All right, well, hold on a second. That was actually a Walmart ad that they repurposed for a Trump ad, but it still holds true. Okay.
So that never ran?
It did run digitally. Open.
I have spent my entire adult life looking for ways to even the odds, to help people have a chance to get ahead, to find the ways for each child to live up to his or her God-given potential. I'm fighting for all Americans, not just some, for the struggling, the striving, and the successful. No matter who you are, what you look like, what faith you practice, or who you love, I am fighting for you. I'm fighting for everyone who's ever been knocked down but refused to be knocked out. I'm going to fight until every little girl in America knows she can grow up to be anything she wants, even President of the United States.
Okay, so let me ask you this. Which one resonated with you more? Raise your hand if the Trump one got you more than the Hillary one. Raise your hand if the Hillary one got you more than the Trump one. Right? Okay. Different people raise their hands. That's why their ads are different. Okay. And we'll talk about contrasting later. But understand like the overall tone of those messages, like it was responding to the dark and foreboding nature of what was happening in rural America when the manufacturing jobs, like those people, like the data shows over and over that those people they're scared, they're isolated, they're worried about a number of things, the direction of the country going in the wrong way and whatever, right? So his ad was all about, and this is an incumbent versus a insurgent in a campaign, and an incumbent in Hillary's case, how are things going to continue down the right path with me, right? How are we going to continue doing the same things with me? Those kinds of things, whereas Trump had to contrast himself with the other side. Things are falling apart with the other side. The factories are closed, but I'm bringing them back, right? And like I said, like that was technically a Walmart ad that got repurposed to become a Trump ad, but it still holds true, okay? The other thing is that looking at the way they talked to their voters, the tone that they used, the lighting, all of those kinds of things are just a deeper part of the language that we talked about earlier, right? It's responding to the emotional connections that those people already have, the way they already feel. It's attaching those candidates to those emotions. And that's why they chose those colors. That's why they chose that sound. That's why they chose that tone, all that kind of stuff, right? And you couldn't run Hillary's ad in rural America and make that work. That's why they showed at the end, she's in New York. They didn't show her in the middle of like rural Arkansas, right? They showed her in New York, okay? So that's the kind of thing that we're thinking about. You just wouldn't run that ad anywhere else. All right, so theme versus message. There's a theme in a campaign, there's a message in a campaign, they're very different things. Barack Obama's campaign theme was change. Everything he said was about change. He said it over and over and over again. He said it so much that the people on his campaign were definitely tired of the word change. But there were people in the country who hadn't heard it enough, right? That's the theme. The message changes. The theme is always the same, but the message changes. So here's Obama in agriculture in Iowa, in front of rural Iowa, and he's talking about change as it pertains to agriculture. Here he is in Detroit, and his message is about manufacturing tied to his theme of change still, okay? It's that your message change depending on who you're talking to. And this is one of the big issues that we have when we run to a lot of libraries, because we want to be somebody for everybody, right? Instead of specifically talking to that person about the issues that they care about. So we have librarians who put together a talk when they go talk to the Chamber of Commerce, and they usually start out great. Libraries are economic development drivers. We help small businesses. We also have story time. We help grandma when she gets an iPad. We also have after school homework help for students. But this Chamber of Commerce only cared about those first two things, right? And so when we're talking about our messaging, like our theme of what we're talking about is we're making whatever, I was about to say like, never mind. So, if our theme is change, we have to figure out how we can tie our message into change, depending on the audience that we're talking to, right? So we would talk to the Chamber of Commerce specifically about small business help, about how libraries are economic drivers, all of that kind of stuff. If we went to the PTA, then we would talk about how the library helps support the library curriculum or the school curriculum, right? That kind of thing. That makes sense, right? Good. So what are some of the themes? We're going to skip that because we're running out of time. But here's the 5 C's of messaging: concise, clear, consistent, convincing, contrasting. Okay. Your message should be concise. Those long messages, I was just doing a training with another library, and she brought out her vision statement, and it was literally like 5 sentences long. It was a huge paragraph vision statement. It wasn't concise. Whatever it is, change, that's concise. When I was at San Mateo County, our vision statement was connect, discover, evolve, concise, right? Everything we did connected back to connect, discover, evolve. It has to be clear. Don't muddle your message, right? Don't spin off into speaking about other things. If you're talking to somebody about somebody in the Chamber of Commerce, being very clear that you're there to talk to them about business, right? Not anything else. Consistent, telling the same thing over and over and over again. Everything that Obama did was about how it was going to be different with him. That was his connection to change, right? Over and over and over again. Convincing, of course, don't say law libraries are going to cure cancer or no puppies are ever going to die again or whatever if you pass this legislation, right? It has to be something convincing, right? You can be slightly hyperbolic, but not over the top exaggeration, of course, right? That's really important. And then contrasting, why is it that they should give the money to you instead of that other organization? So how are you different than other organizations that are taking up tax dollars? What's the difference between county law libraries? Why don't we just close down all the county law libraries and just give it to the regular libraries, right? And that, I mean, I'm sure, do you guys get that question? Because it seems like one that would come up, because that's kind of stuff that we hear on the campaign trail. So how are you guys different? What services do you provide that are different than other things in your community? How do you provide services that aren't just social services that are provided somewhere else, right? That's contrasting. 2793. So this is a formation for a message. There's a structure for a message. 27 words in 9 seconds to give 3 key points. Okay? 27 words in 9 seconds to give 3 key points. If you're at 26 words, you're okay. If you're at 28 words, you're okay. 8 or 10 seconds, you're okay. But any more than 3 key messages and it's over, right? You can do less than 3, you can't do more than 3. This is all pretty much just based on just the way the human brain works. 27 words, because that is generally like what a lead in a newspaper is. That's the average for a lead in a newspaper. It's also the average quote in a newspaper. It's also what you generally read in like Facebook posts and stuff before you decide to move on, okay? It's also tweetable, which is nice. 9 seconds, again, attention span issue. You listen to something for 9 seconds before you decide to tune out. A lot of you guys tuned out 9 seconds after I started talking, right? Before you change the channel on the radio or the TV, 9 seconds. 3 key messages, because that's just the way the human brain works. we just remember things in threes. It's why we have like the Oxford comma. It's why when you tell a joke, something happens 3 times before the funny thing happens, right? Our brains just work in threes. We remember threes. Our brain can process 3 things. If you go to 4 things, the first thing kind of drops off a little bit, right? And this is just a psychological issue with human brains. So 2793 for like the Chamber of Commerce would be something like, the library provides a lot of great services to local businesses, such as access to A to Z databases where people can find leads, Wi-Fi access, and a space to work, right? That's a 27. That's not a great 2793, but that's a 2793 basically, right? And so you don't just walk in and say that and then walk out, right? That's not how it works. But it's a great lead-in. I mean, it's a great lead-in for like an email. It's a great lead-in for a Facebook ad. If you are doing a speech or a talk, a lot of times we have libraries build out a 2793 in order to process their thoughts, so that everything that they say after that 2793 just connects to that message, right? If it doesn't fit into that, you don't talk about it, right? So that's the 2793. Staying on message. Bernie Sanders, like him or hate him, he was the absolute king of staying on message. Somebody once asked him in this really great radio ad or this really great TV interview, I said, what are you going to do about ISIS? And he's like, ISIS is a terrible threat to America. We have to do something about it. We need some coalition partners. But you know what else is a terrible threat to America? What we're doing to middle class America, And I was like, oh, okay. And then somebody said, okay, well, what are you going to do about Trump, Trump's vulgarity? And he's like, well, I don't approve of his vulgarity. I think something needs to be done about that. But you know what else is vulgar? What we're doing to middle class America, And it was just, that was his message. And staying on message like that is just so important because people are going to try to throw you off. People are going to try and talk to you about, we get stuff all the time. We want to do a tax measure for this library, and they're like, well, just pay for it with private funding. And how do you get back to that message? How do you stay on message? And you can do that through this thing called the message box. And this message box helps us develop a way to get back to what we say about ourselves and what we want the public to know about ourselves. And this is called a Tully message box, T-U-L-L-Y. You guys can look it up and dive real deep into it. But you basically fill out 2793s for like what we say about ourselves, what they say about us, what they say about themselves, and what we say about them. So right here, what we say about ourselves, I'm not going to do a 2793. I'm just going to do something quick. Libraries provide essential services to the community or whatever. And then what they say about us, you're sucking up tax dollars. What they say about themselves. Now, nobody here who is coming out against library wakes up in the morning, they're like, you know what, I'm an asshole. Like nobody ever says that. But what they say about themselves is they are the gatekeepers, right? Or they are protecting the electorate from bureaucratic and overzealous government. They are the watchdogs. You hear that term watchdog all the time. Those are things that they say about themselves. And understanding that, I think, is really, really important. What is it that they really, really believe about themselves, right? What we say about them. There's a box that we don't use very often, but it's fun to fill out because this is just where you go negative on them. And we had a campaign in Lafourche Parish, Louisiana, where they were trying to defund the library in order to build a prison. That was this guy's whole thing, and they were going to do a vote on it. It was going to happen on Saturday. We found out about it on Monday. Okay, and the reason we found out about it is because he said, well, we're doing this because the only people who use the library anyway are illegals and poor people and blah blah. And with a bunch of other racial epithets that I won't say, right? He had like this horrific quote that he said to a reporter because he believed it that much. And so we were able to fill out this box with, this dude's a racist, like straight up, this dude's a racist. So we put the campaign together on Tuesday. By Wednesday afternoon, we had raised about $6,000, which we spent on Facebook ads, putting out, this dude's a racist. If you vote for the prison instead of the library, you are a racist too, right? And his campaign was over. It was completely blown out on Saturday, right? Even though he was polling better earlier. So, that's how you use that. You don't use it often, but that's how you use it. We're going to get a lot into opposition. I have a whole presentation on opposition later. and we're kind of running out of time, so I'll just move forward. Empower your community to create messages. There's a great report called the Network Change Report. Okay, and the Network Change Report is all about how Fight for 15, the Keystone Pipeline, and a number of other really successful movements avalanched and snowballed so quickly. How did they structure themselves in a way that made their movement successful? And the reason is that they empowered their supporters to take control over aspects of the campaign. And librarianship, especially with like a lot of our state associations, especially with like ALA, they try and control a lot of stuff. And we need to figure out how we can move away from that model and move into this empowerment model where we're creating like cells that do these amazing things to attract more donors and volunteers and get out messages more often. How do we empower our communities to tell the messages about us? I don't have a big solution of it because we don't really have that in librarianship at all. We are a very top-down kind of industry, and we aren't this network change industry that I think we need to start thinking about moving towards. How many of you guys have volunteers? Are volunteers a thing that's used a lot? One person? Great job. How do we find more volunteers? How do we engage them? You know, you guys don't have friends groups or foundations and that kind of stuff either, right? Can I just ask why not though?
Nobody likes us.
Because nobody likes you? Yeah.
We're lawyers.
Yeah. But I mean, could that? Yes.
Actually, in academic libraries, we're not allowed to use volunteers.
Mm-hmm.
At least in.
Okay.
But we do have student workers.
Yeah, you do have student workers. Great. Okay.
We pay them though.
Yeah, you pay them. Sure. Okay, that's fine. Right. They're students. Come on. All right. Cool.
In the private sector, we use our own clientele as volunteers.
Okay.
I use the library, or I use all of my younger associates to come and talk on a panel to advocate for the associates coming in to use the library.
Good. Great. I just wanted to know the answer to that question. I didn't really know that model. So, but what I'm going to ask you all to do is read the Network Change Report and think about how you can empower people to act on your behalf. Okay. And then finally, last thing here, getting the message out. How do we get these messages out? Face-to-face is always the most effective way to get a message out. That's just it. That's why phone banking is considered face-to-face. Canvassing door-to-door is considered face-to-face. Meeting with your legislators on Ledge Day is also face-to-face. We don't do Ledge Day very well as an industry either. That's a whole nother presentation. But meeting with people face-to-face is the most effective way to build relationships, to empower coalitions, to build volunteers, to engage donors, to get people to vote yes. Face-to-face works far and above anything else, and we can't be scared to go out into our communities and literally sit down with somebody and ask them straight up for things. Like that's really the most powerful thing to do. There's a book called Fanatical Prospecting, which is all about sales. I don't know anything about sales, so I picked up this book called Fanatical Prospecting, and the entire book, it turns out, was just about how effective face-to-face connections were, right? He was talking about how some salesmen, they get on social media and then they like post and they do this and they do that and they don't spend as much time just getting on the phone and dialing. And the salesmen who get on the phone and just dial and talk to people are the ones who outperform people who do everything else, right? And so we see it the same in campaigns. I can't tell you how many campaigns we've worked with who have had excuses about why they can't knock on people's door or phone bank, because both of those things are very scary to do. Calling strangers and knocking on people's doors is very scary to do. But if you don't do that kind of work, you are going to lose, plain and simply. If you don't have those relationships, that's where we see the campaigns that do it win, the campaigns that don't do it lose. And that's just the way it is, okay? Direct mail is really, really tough to do effectively. You really have to know your audience well enough to know if they're somebody who even opens direct mail. You have to know if they are in a demographic so that whatever piece is on that very expensive piece of mail that you just put out is even going to matter to them, right? That audience has to be really, really data-driven and very segmented, and the messages have to be very specific to those audiences, and they have to care about direct mail for that to ever be effective. So think about that before you do direct mail for any of your advocacy work. Digital has just a ton of data built in. We dove deep into Facebook. Email is the other thing. Somebody pointed this out to me at one of the campaign trainings, and it blew my mind. I might just be stupid, but I'm going to tell you guys this anyway. Email is the only digital platform that works across platforms. So you can't send somebody a Facebook message on Twitter, right? But you can send somebody an email from Yahoo to Google to Bing to AOL. It's the only thing on the internet that works between platforms, okay? And that just blew my mind. And then he went on to say, like, that's why it is the absolute key to the internet. Because people have that email address connected to their LinkedIn, their Facebook, their Twitter, their whatever. So if MySpace went away, if you used MySpace to collect emails, MySpace went away, you can say, like, MySpace is gone, connect with us on Facebook, right? You can send multiple emails out. It doesn't cost you as much. You can do a lot of segmenting on those emails and all kinds of data behind it. Email, if you guys aren't collecting emails, think about that. Your front desk, when you guys are talking to people, if you guys run ads, anything you do should be getting something back. And specifically, if you can get something back, getting emails back to re-engage them, to talk to them. I don't have messages for specifically what you should talk to them about, but that's something that needs to be thought about. I'm glad you used this, our law library services. Did you know that they are threatening to defund these kinds of services? Will you sign this petition, right? That kind of stuff. Paid and earned media. Paid media is anything that you pay for, billboard ads, radio ads, TV. These are kind of effective. The effectiveness is going away. If you run a radio ad, you better know who listens to that radio channel, right? If you run a TV ad, you better know who's watching TV during that time. If you put up a billboard, you better know who's driving up and down that road. If you don't, you are going to run the risk of turning up opposition, which we'll talk about in another training. But you also run the risk of just wasting all your money, right? Networking and schmoozing. I do a whole nother workshop on networking and schmoozing. Networking and schmoozing is absolutely one of the big, powerful things that you can do because it goes back to like just having coffee to build coalitions. It's a face-to-face thing that you can do. Just showing up to events that are happening in your community is incredibly powerful. I can't tell you how many success stories my librarians I've had just by showing up at a networking event, at some other thing that was happening in the community and just being seen. And then of course, building rallies and events, which there might be a reason. I can't imagine to do one around county law libraries, but there might be, right? There might be. All right, cool. All right, so that was your message stuff. And we're a little bit over, so sorry about that, team.